समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है, अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है, अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
आप समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Donald Trump has held his big meeting with Zelensky, and this time he even managed to get the Ukrainian leader to visit him in a suit. Alongside Zelensky were all of Europe's major leaders. But from an Indian perspective, what does it all mean for India's nosediving relationships with Washington? In fact, it seems as if a new axis or an old new axis is emerging. India, Russia, China all over again. But can India really trust China? Or does India have no options but to be as cold-bloodedly transactional, at least in the short term, as Donald Trump has been with New Delhi? A lot of questions as geopolitics get turned on its head by Trump's tariff war. I'm Barkha, here with the Mojo story. On the program today, we'll continue to look at the large ramifications of Trump's tariff war that are being felt across the world and also here in India. Zelensky came to meet Trump in a suit, but Trump's key aides are suggesting that the reason that this movement has taken place at all, the reason the Alaska summit took place at all with Putin meeting with Trump, is because Trump slapped 50% tariffs on India for the purchase of Russian oil. In an extraordinary op-ed, one of Trump's key aides is now demanding that if India wants a strategic partnership, it should start behaving like a strategic partner to the US. In other words, choose a side. Pete Navarro in the Trump administration has accused India of cozying up to China and Russia. Indeed, the Chinese foreign minister has met with Foreign Minister Jaishankar, NSA Ajit Doval, and a meeting with the Prime Minister is scheduled as well. But from here, he goes straight to Pakistan, leaving us with many questions. Can India really afford to trust Beijing? But at the moment, India has to play a short-term move on the chessboard. Trump may have left traditional adversaries no options but to plot their next moves together. What might those moves look like, and what should they look like? Let me introduce our very distinguished guests and experts on the program today as Trump continues to create chaos in the world as we understand it. Joining me is veteran author and columnist Tavleen Singh. Always a pleasure, Tavleen. Good to see you. Cheryl Sharma, military veteran, is with us. And after a long time, welcoming back to the program, Ambassador Arun Singh, India's former ambassador to the United States of America. Welcome, all of you, to the program. Let me start on a funny note, because we're going to get into some heavy-duty geopolitical conversation. So let me actually start with a hilarious moment that takes place in the White House. Zelensky comes wearing a suit, and the same reporter who questioned him for not wearing a suit the last time gets to ask him this time about his suit. Let's bring some levity into the proceedings and start with this little snippet from the big Trump-Zelensky meet. Take a look.
Yes, sir. I've got a question for each of you. First of all, Mr. President Zelensky, you look fabulous in that suit.
I said the same thing.
Yeah, you look good.
I said the same thing.
Yeah.
Isn't that nice? That's the one that attacked you last time. See, now he's.
I remember that.
I know. You look wonderful. No, my first question for you, President
But you
Zelensky.
are in the same suit. You see, I changed, you are not.
Maybe yours is much better. Real quickly, upon peace, God willing we get peace, are you open?
So that was, of course, funny, but what is actually happening in terms of the stakes for India is not funny. Ambassador Singh, I'll start with you. On the day that Zelensky was headed to the White House, Putin dialed Modi. The Chinese foreign minister is still in town. There seems to be a kind of renewal of the Russia-China India equation. China is even calling for the trilateral sort of equation between the three of them, RIC, to be renewed. How do you see what's happening? I mean, Trump may have created at least short-term, I don't want to use the word alliances, but short-term transactional affairs between otherwise adversarial nations, at least when it comes to India and China. How do you see what's happening?
So one, Barkha, all relationships in international relations are always transactional. So we should keep that in mind, short term or long term. So that element is always there. We shouldn't assume otherwise. Second, we do not have an adversarial relationship with Russia. So it's the China dimension. That's a challenge. Certainly, what's happening now is being noticed and observed, but we should not overinterpret it, because the positive move with China had started some time back, because Galwan is now 5 years ago. And some time ago, the Indian government was already talking to China about easing up on some of the visas, direct flights, the pilgrimages had started, some of the investment restrictions were being removed. So this process was already on. But I think certainly what China will try and do is watch what is happening now in the US-India relationship and see if that will give a greater opening for them to do more with India, politically, otherwise, in terms of business and technology partnership. But while doing that, they would like to maintain the upper hand and see if that can give them more leverage vis-a-vis India. And certainly from India's point of view, they would be open to doing more with China, but they'll need to do that while ensuring that their national security is not compromised in any way, and that their own sort of options are not compromised in any way. So that delicate game will play out now. On the Russia aspect, India has sustained the relationship with Russia through the ups and downs that Russia has had in its own relations with the West. But there is a limit to that. Russia can be a very strong defense partner, a very strong energy partner. But in terms of the civilian dimensions of the economy, Russia does not have strengths. And therefore, for those areas, India has to look elsewhere. So given all that, US will remain an essential relationship for us. So far, our largest trading partner, largest investment partner, largest single country presence of Indian origin diaspora. So those dimensions are there. Now, at the moment, the relationship is certainly going through a difficult phase because of the politics of Donald Trump. Because there are certain elements in Donald Trump's politics that are impacting negatively on India. First, his deep desire for a Nobel Peace Prize, and therefore wanting to take credit for how the India-Pakistan dimension played out on 10th May. And for its own reasons, India's position has been that there is no role for a third party in India-Pakistan issues. Although during active phases of conflict, in the past also, be it during Kargil in 99, Operation Parakram in 2001, 2002, Pulwama in 2019, during active phases of conflict, US has been active in trying to de-escalate the situation. But since the Simla Agreement in 1972, India has not accepted any third-party role for mediation. And way back in 2019, in a meeting with Imran Khan in the White House, Donald Trump said that he was ready to mediate on Kashmir. And he went on to say that the Indian Prime Minister had asked him to mediate on Kashmir, which is completely not true. And the Indian Foreign Minister had to say in Parliament that there's no truth to what the President is saying. So there is a certain aspect of Donald Trump's desire in terms of how he wants to play his role, which runs into conflict with India. On trade, he's trying to show to his base that he's got concessions from every country without offering anything in return. So, the Europeans have pledged $600 billion of investment, $750 billion of energy purchases. And he says they've opened up their market, but I have still imposed a 15% tariff. Similarly, the Japanese have committed $500 billion of investment, and US has still imposed a 15% tariff. Now, the India-US trade negotiation, as one understands it, India was among the first countries with which it started. Very detailed negotiations, 5 rounds of in-person, about 40 rounds of virtual discussions. And it was a balanced, detailed negotiation with benefits for both sides. And India was far more forward-leaning in terms of what it was willing to offer. But there was nothing in it that Donald Trump could claim that he's given nothing in turn and India has completely opened up its market. So given what he was doing elsewhere, it was not playing well for him. And before I conclude, the final element, that he wants to make progress on the Russia-Ukraine conflict for the reasons we've discussed. He's under criticism in the US for not taking a harder line on Russia. Now, he can't increase the sanctions on Russia at a time when he wants to talk to Russia. He can't increase sanctions on China or levy tariffs on China because China has shown countervailing power and
Yeah.
has done export controls that US needs. So at this stage, when he felt that there was a need for him to show something on Russia, and in any case there were complications in the India relationship, he's used Russia as a peg to increase the tariffs on India. So we've come as a collateral damage. So it's a complicated situation. We have to deal with it. And as I see it, I think there is a sense here to deal with it with strength, calmness, firmness, but not escalate the situation.
So let me actually take that to Tavleen before I come to General Sharma. I think in many ways, Tavleen, you've been arguing for a long time that India's natural affiliation should be with the United States of America and not with countries like China and Russia that you do not see as democracies. But Trump may not have left India with very many good options. He's behaving like a two-bit bully. You have his aides like Pete Navarro writing op-eds basically telling India, you've got to pick a side. You can't be doing business with everybody. You're cozying up to the Chinese and the Russians. The fact is, it is Trump who has probably pushed India to this sort of extraordinary moment where Putin dials Modi the same day the Chinese foreign minister comes calling. So notwithstanding your urging India to lean more naturally towards the Americans, do you think Trump has even given us that option anymore?
As I said to you, I've never seen any clear foreign policy from Trump. I don't believe he understands that, the concept of foreign policy. And as Fareed Zakaria said the other day on his program, he said he's just taken 25 years of outreach to India and thrown it in the garbage bin. Okay, so I mean, the ambassador was very scholarly and analytical, as diplomats are meant to be. I actually am appalled by the way that Putin was received after having put us under, 50% tariffs. He greeted Putin as if Putin was a kind of conquering hero that he was meeting. So, I don't know whether we can rely on what Trump really understands about what he's up to. What I'm very impressed by at the moment is the way Europe has handled it. I thought it was really moving to see that every major European leader was there yesterday in the White House with Zelensky. And, they were calming. I mean, they were showing their strength in a very interesting way. I think that India has actually no choice but to be with the Americans because, anyone who trusts China is, we know what the Chinese think of India. We know that Pakistan is virtually, part of China. I mean, it's a submarine. We know that Russia with China is a junior partner. So what do we get out of, suddenly keeling away from the US and, heading off to it? So
but what have we got from being soft on them? Some might ask.
I saw the way that the Europeans, he's very close to Maloney, but even she was there, right? So they've handled it in a kind of way where they've indulged him. And, I think that maybe we'll have to indulge him. For instance, this insistence that we don't have third-party mediation. We've had the Americans involved in our wars since Nehru in 1962, when he rang Kennedy at the last minute and said, please bomb, the Chinese. So, let's not pretend that we have... on Kargil, it was Clinton involved. We know that the Americans have been involved, and maybe they were this time. So I think we've got to find a way in the way that the Europeans have. And, I would not rely on any kind of relationship with either China or,
You're saying despite what Trump has done, you would choose the Americans over the Chinese and the Russians?
Yes.
Because
for a start, I don't like people like, I don't like autocrats. I don't like Putin one bit because look what he did to Navalny. Look what he does to his opposition. So, for me, the idea, we should treat the Russians as a kind of oil, as a petrol pump if we need to. But, it's not our natural... it's not, we are on the side of democracy. And we don't know when Trump is going to change. We don't know when Xi Jinping is suddenly going to change. So I still think that we have to find a way of placating this man who really has no understanding of foreign policy at all.
So, General Sharma, let's take this to you. I agree and partially with Tavleen and don't agree with part of what she said. I do agree with her on trusting the Chinese, on doing business with the Chinese. I also take Ambassador Arun Singh's point that there is no shared values diplomacy. And that's where I disagree with Tavleen. I don't think this is about whether we relate more to the Chinese, relate more to the Russians, or relate more to the Americans. I think it's about what's in it for us, because that's the only question Trump is asking himself. Now, from that question, what's in it for us? The Chinese foreign minister there on your screen with NSA Doval to meet the prime minister later, he's going to be part of a strategic dialogue, quote unquote, in Islamabad on the 21st of this month. China has played an active role in Operation Sindoor. Despite my sort of blood boiling and now just getting mildly irritated by Trump as an Indian, I mean, China is much more dangerous to India's security than Trump is, I would argue. But I don't know what you think.
Thank you, Barkha. I don't know whether we can compare on who's more a security risk to India. And I don't think we can measure it so simply.
Sure.
Let me put it this way. We can't be so hard-nosed about relationship. As Ambassador Arun Singh had said, this is the time for only our own national interests which matter. And our own national interests dictate to us that we have to be equidistant for all three. We have great amount of advantage to be gained by having relationship with China, despite what's happening on the border, despite they're not a democracy. They supply us items which are actually facilitating our growth to an economic part towards a developed status. The assembly, the sub components that are required to make items for export or raw materials, or for what Prime Minister announced the other day, nuclearization or nuclear power. Everything comes from the Chinese. Nothing comes of this kind from the United States of the sea. So how can we de-link ourselves from the trade in Chinese in case we wish to develop to come to a 2047 status? We cannot do it if we do not take what we are taking from the Chinese. And we have 60% of our weaponry and, hard-nosed relationship with Russia for a very long time. How can we de-link with the Russians at all in this matter? And in the worst of times, they come up to support us. So our relationship with Russia is on a different plane altogether. But having said that, indeed, there is an importance of a relationship with the United States. It is the United States, as the ambassador rightly pointed out, the great amount of investments here. The largest diaspora that we have is in United States. The number of students studying in the United States are there. So, to say that, Palna kis tarah bhari hai, which is the more important nation to have relationship, I don't think we can divide this into
so
measures.
You don't agree with, I see Taveen's hand going up, but a brief interjection from me first. You don't agree with Pete Navarro's op-ed where he says if you want a strategic partnership, choose a side. I mean, I'm paraphrasing him, but that's effectively what he wrote.
So I think I'll quote one of the American presidents to tell him, read my lips. The fact of the matter is that we have our own responsibilities. If, the Chinese have started giving us the tunnel boring machines and the urea, we would have been buying this at exorbitant cost from Norway or from any other countries which the Chinese have stopped recently to us. So, while we understand that Chinese have a relationship with Pakistan, Chinese also have an issue with us on the borders. But despite that, they are the manufacturing powerhouse of the world. They are suppliers. Most of the countries that we buy from Indonesia, Vietnam, Malaysia, are all industries owned by the Chinese. So, how do we de-link ourselves? You can't trade with a country in the world and say this item does not belong to the Chinese behind the scenes. It's the way the world is progressing today. So we can't de-link the Chinese. We can't de-link the Russians, and of course we cannot de-link with the Americans. It's a very complicated world, a very difficult world, and that's the way we have to go ahead.
Okay, Tavleen briefly, and then Ambassador Arun Singh. Tavleen, can we?
There's no deal, but nobody de-links. We're not talking about de-linking. I was actually saying, and it is always our national interest that has to guide us. I mean, surely that's the fundamental principle of this. And I feel that it is our national interest to, at the moment, not, sort of get all, rutified and say, oh, the Americans have been so mean, Trump is being mean to us, and, we're now going to, I don't think we should do that. I think it's in our national interest to placate him in some way, like Europe has done, like for instance, Zelensky has done. Who has been more insulted, more openly among the world leaders than Zelensky? And look what he did. He went and, made a few jokes and wore a suit. I think that we've got to find a way back into this relationship somehow.
Do you agree, Ambassador Arun Singh? I'm coming to you only. I think what Tavleen is asking us to do is say, if Trump has a big ego, we shouldn't have one. We should be ready to sort of treat Trump with kid gloves, handle his giant ego with kid gloves, in the way that Zelensky has quite clearly done after having been rebuked, on camera. He's even returned with his dress code changed, right? He's even gone that far. Do you agree that even if it takes coming down from our own sense of umbrage at how Trump has behaved, that's what we need to do?
So first, on the point about Pete Navarro saying pick a side. Would the US pick a side between India and Pakistan because of what India asks?
Well said. Well said.
Or between India and China because India asks? So they will take a choice based on their perception of their national interest. So to demand from another sovereign country that you pick a side, whatever be your assessment of your national interest, is certainly not something that they do themselves or will say. So that's one.
Correct.
The second thing that we have to remember, Barkha, is that because of the history of the India-US relationship, in India, there's deep suspicion related to the US because of the past. And in the past, US has been seen as a coercive and unreliable partner. Now, this was changing over the last 25 years because during the Kargil conflict, for the first time, US came out clearly on the side of India and said that Pakistan had violated the line of control and had to go back. It was the United States that did the Civil Nuclear Cooperation Agreement with India in 2008, and in a sense brought India out of nuclear isolation, without which even the French and the Russians could not have continued with civil nuclear cooperation.
Yeah, I think we just lost Ambassador Arun Singh there. General Sharma, if you want to add to that, I think the great point, in response to what Tavleen said, that it is in our national interest to placate Trump, is, for Americans asking us to choose a side, why don't they first choose a side? It's not like they've chosen our side. General Sharma?
So the issue is absolutely right. Look, like I've been arguing earlier also, that Sindoor may have put up President Trump. We could have still managed to placate him by saying he did allow us to, he did attempt a kind of facilitation for last 2, 3, 4 days till 10th of May. President Trump and his team were intimately involved into bringing the peace about on the thing, and of course they pushed the hands of the Pakistanis to give us a call and said, okay, let's broker a thing. So the American hand behind the scenes, I think, was there. We could have handled it a little more subtly and said, we thank President Trump for whatever push he did, and they did help, and we brought Pakistan to seek a ceasefire from us, which was directly brokered by us. I think we could have managed the words into a little more better manner so that President Trump would have been riled. Even yesterday, he was counting that he brought 6 countries into peace. He again counted India and Pakistan as one of those 6 countries, 6 wars that he brought into peace. So I think that may have put him off tremendously, and I think we could have handled better. And I agree with it. The last 15 years was a better period, from President Manmohan Singh's time, and even before, when Stuart Talbot and Jaswant Singh was talking. So all these years they have been a good relationship, and there's no reason to put off the President Trump. Of course, he's got an ego. It has to be handled in that manner.
So, Tavleen, I do want to ask you to comment on what Arun Singh was just saying, that, it's all very rich for the Americans to say pick a side. I think one of the reasons that Indians have some sort of suspicion of the Americans is not just because of Trump's antics. It's because of this old historical sort of memory of, indulging Pakistan, right? And these days with Trump and Munir's love fest, it almost seems back to the Robin Rafale sort of years. There is something going on there that we don't fully understand. And I think the Americans could argue, why are you cozying up to China and Russia? But they'd have to explain, why are they cozying up to the Pakistanis?
Okay, by the way, Robin Rafale is a friend of mine. And what she said was very definitely misinterpreted by the Indian media. She was actually she was not trying to be on Pakistan's side, I don't think, in any real way. I talked to her about it later on. But what I want to say is, why do we then trust China? China's been, China, America hasn't invaded India, hasn't said, we've got to give Kashmir away, hasn't actually taken a side on that very important issue.
Yeah.
If we can trust China, we can trust the United States, which is a democracy. Look at the way Trump is being lampooned in his own country for exactly the kind of hypocrisy that he's showing in his foreign policy. Do you see Xi Jinping being lampooned, or Putin? For me, I'm really a Democrat to the core of my being. So I really feel that whatever the problems we're facing just now, we've got to, that's what diplomats are for. We've got to get our diplomats, we've got to get them to find a way back into, and I agree with the general. I think that, this business of saying openly, we will not allow, third-party intervention. The Pakistanis haven't held to the similar agreement. What are we talking about? Has there been any moment, in the past few years when the Pakistanis haven't gone to the UN and yelled and shrieked about Kashmir? So, that is, if somebody is helping, who cares?
So, Ambassador, I was saying we kind of lost you midstream, but we got your very important question about why the Americans don't first pick a side. I'll let you complete your point, and then I want to play out a statement from Lindsey Graham. Go ahead, Ambassador Singh.
So what the point I was making when I unfortunately lost the connection is that, because once again in India, US is being perceived as an unreliable and coercive partner, it will take some doing from both sides to pick up on the trajectory of the relationship that was there before Trump disrupted it in a certain way. But we still need to be done, because ultimately, if you look at economic linkages, trade linkages, technology partnerships, and other countries, the Europeans, the Japanese, are willing to do more with India if they see that the US is doing more with India. For instance, in 2023, US and India launched a major initiative for a partnership on critical and emerging technologies. Once they did that, then the Japanese said they also wanted to do it. And the British came forward and did something called the Technology Security Initiative with India, which was patterned entirely on the India-US initiative. So we have to keep that in mind, that having a better relationship with the US certainly widens the options that we have. But while working on that, India has to make sure that our autonomy of decision-making is sustained, because you cannot give US so much leverage that ultimately you have no option but to do what they demand. And you don't want to be in that position, because their decisions are based on how their political leaders see their political interests.
Absolutely.
And that shouldn't guide our decision making.
I agree. And I want to talk a little bit about exactly this, the autonomy of decision making, which actually comes down to sovereignty, which is what I think is the larger debate around this purchase of Russian oil business that Trump goes on and on about. But, Lindsey Graham and our ambassador did meet with him. Despite those meetings, somewhere India's message isn't getting through to Trump. This is what he said most recently about India's purchase of Russian oil. Take a look.
The only reason Putin's in Alaska, he didn't come to see how Alaska was doing after he bought it. He came to Alaska because Trump threatened to put a 50% tariff on India for buying Russian oil and gas. What's the weakness of Russia? Almost all of their income comes from oil and gas sales. If we went after the customers of Russia and said you had to pick between the American economy and buying cheap Russian oil or gas, they would pick the American economy.
So, Tawhid, I want to come to you. You spoke about what Fareed Zakaria said, and he also called this one of Trump's biggest foreign policy mistakes.
The biggest.
The biggest. And
He called it the biggest.
I happened to be on one of his shows, and he asked me what is the mood, the sentiment on the street in India, and I said, to put it simply, I would say even Indians who don't understand anything about oil imports, the fact that Europe is actually buying this oil after it gets refined, who don't understand the nitty-gritty of this, simply have one word to say: we're a sovereign nation. It's our business what we do, who we buy oil from. And here I must ask you that when you say let's find a way to placate Trump, I agree with Ambassador Arun Singh. Surely the Americans can't be telling us who to buy oil from. And as you yourself said, laying out the red carpet for Putin, whom a few months ago was a great pal of Trump's, and penalizing us for buying oil, which actually helps our people because we're getting even cheaper rates.
Why are you trying to find logic in the actions of a man who doesn't understand foreign policy? I've said this before. He does not understand history. He does not understand foreign policy, Barkha. Let's not give him that. I'm saying we're dealing with a man who really is an amateur. And, look what he said after his meeting with Putin. He said 10 out of 10. 10 out of 10, you haven't got a ceasefire. You haven't got anything. Yeah. And what he wants is Ukraine to make a deal. That's his level, right? The mistake that we have made in India, and which a lot of the Hindutva supporters have made, is in the overblown propaganda that was done by the BJP on the special relationship between Modi and Trump. And, diplomacy, the ambassador knows this much better than me. It's not based on friendships. Nobody is out there saying, this is my pal, so I'm going to have his interests at heart. But I think that there's a great feeling of being let down in the supporters of the prime minister, because there were yagnas and havans being held when, Trump was being elected. And, let's admit it, Modi himself went there and made a very reckless, very undiplomatic support, of Trump.
But it kind of works both ways, right? When he did that, he was criticized. When he didn't meet him during the campaign, it's believed that Trump took offense at it. So there's a delicate tightrope with this guy.
This guy has an ego the size of, the Nobel Peace Prize. Okay. So, he really, you've got to just accept that this is what we're dealing with and learn how to work around it. Do you know? Look at the way he's dealt even at a personal level with, say, Elon Musk. So our prime minister went and, played around with Elon Musk's children to try and please Trump. And then Elon Musk was suddenly ousted. So, we've got to be very careful. We're dealing with somebody who isn't logical and who has no understanding of history, politics, or, what he's done is harm America more than he's harmed the world, because he's proved that there is no such thing as American exceptionalism. They're just like us. For them to have elected this man, what can I say?
So, General Sharma, if he's an amateur, he doesn't understand foreign policy. I think what Taplin is saying is our old classical rules of sort of cautious expression are not going to get through to him. There has to be a more unconventional way of reaching this guy. People are talking about another Modi-Trump meeting. Personally, I think unless homework is done to the T, that might be disastrous. I don't think the Prime Minister would assent to it unless he had a certain predictability about how it would go.
So, Barkha, the predictability has to be brought about by behind-the-scenes work done prior to such a meeting. The fact of the matter is that finally, in America, the way it is going, it's the principals who are meeting and who are coming across to solutions. The lower rungs of ministerial work, which used to follow earlier times, is not a success story presently. The Secretary of State and the others who were able to achieve many things are not able to do the same thing because there is one-man rule. And I think it is a democracy, but then, it's that kind of democracy. So what I would like to say is that finally, one day, the principals have to meet, like Putin met with the President Trump in Alaska, and like Zelensky is met. I don't know whether Zelensky is a Democrat or a dictator. But once they meet, and then only things will progress it here. Finally, this has to happen in this manner. And let me add one word about a good friendly nation called China. The fact of the matter is that a trade and a border and strategic issues are two separate baskets and cannot be dealing together. The fact is that despite that the foreign external affairs minister has sought de-escalation and there is no answer forthcoming from the foreign minister Wang, the fact of the matter is that the kind of trains and the roads and the facilities that they've got and the troops that they've got across the border, the strategic issues are a different kettle of fish altogether. You cannot take China for not being expansionist and not being revanchist, as it has shown in the course of last 5 years, despite that there is a change happened in October last year. So the fact is that we have to be hard-nosed here. We require assistance from Chinese to develop our nation, but we cannot relent ourselves in any which way on the borders, because that will bring us to some different grief.
Ambassador Arun Singh, let me give you the last word here. I mean, I think the feeling is that conventional diplomacy isn't working, and this is top-down diplomacy. Earlier, it used to be that there was, envoys met, back channels met, diplomats met, and then the main guys were brought on, and then, they either had a deal or they didn't have a deal. They still had to do the last mile. I think here there is a sense that everything is personal for Trump. And if everything is personal for Trump, what is the way to get through to him? That is if we agree that we need to get through to him. Ambassador Singh.
So at one level, certainly everything is personal for Trump. And I think there has been a recognition since the first Trump term that conventional diplomacy doesn't work with him and you have to deal with him directly. And I think the Indian system had handled that quite well. Even if you look at Trump 2.0, the first phase till about June went very well. The Indian foreign minister was among those invited to the inauguration. The first multilateral they did was with the Quad foreign ministers. The first bilateral that Secretary Rubio did was with the Indian foreign minister. The Indian prime minister was the fourth foreign leader invited to the White House after the King of Jordan, Prime Minister of Japan, and Prime Minister of Israel. And they started the trade negotiation. So I think they handled that quite well. But yes, because of the kind of politics that Trump has worked out for himself, which I elaborated on, there is a difficult moment. And there are ways of getting through to him. There are people around him, not the conventional diplomatic approach, but the difference from the first Trump term is in that term, there were people around him who were willing to speak to him and lay out the facts before him and the options. Today, all those around him are only amplifying what he's saying. And because he has a certain political hold on the entire American system.
So what would you suggest? Would you
have to reach out? And I'm sure that's happening. So all that will be there. But, some sense of what will emerge from a top-level meeting you have to have. Because you cannot expose your prime minister to the risk of an uncertain outcome. Because he has his own politics and image in the country. So.
Well, we leave it there. I think at least while the Chinese foreign minister is in India, I can quote the oft-repeated Chinese phrase, we live in interesting times. And that's all we can say for the moment. Thank you so much, Ambassador Arun Singh, Tavleen Singh, General Sharma. Always a pleasure to our audience. Thank you. See you soon.
It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.